Good everyone. I hope you guys have an amazing day. Welcome to another episode of ANZ podcast. As you've noticed, I have changed my podcast from NZ to ANZ because this year I will include Australia as well. So today I have with me very special guest Gaurav Thakur, who's a solution architect. Gaurav been working on a Salesforce space for a very long time. Very talented guy. So I brought him today to talk about flows and Apex. So it's like a casual discussion. It's not like any interview session or anything. So Gaurav, welcome to my show.
Hey, Vikas, thank you so much for letting me be here.
Thank you, man. How's your break?
Yeah, it was good. I didn't do much. I've been, just been taking rest and trying to take, as easy as possible. That's about it.
Oh yeah, that's cool. So today what we're gonna do, we're gonna talk about Apex and Flow, right? This is normally a very interesting topic for most of the people who gets into the Salesforce space, right? Because people have different perception. So first start with the flows, right? Are you a fan of flows?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think so. They have their space. And especially with all the updates that have recently come across on the platform with respect to Flow, the new Flow designer, and more and more capabilities being added to the Flow framework. I think it's definitely a really powerful tool.
Right, right. That's right. I mean, I have used flows as well, and but the only thing with the flows, right? I mean, let me get into that aspect a little bit. Like people say flows are great, and I appreciate that. Salesforce done a pretty good job in making a non-developer to work on an aspect which you can do by flow. But that being said, so you might have also noticed, right? People write flows in a way it gets very clunky and very complicated, right? And then
Yeah.
it becomes very difficult to debug.
True. So I think so. That's where what I feel is that people think that Flow is a no code or a low code framework,
Yeah,
and that's something that I kind of disagree with. I feel like whenever you're creating a flow, it is still code. It is just not in the form of the traditional coding language. That it does not have the syntax of a different language that you are learning and implementing, and structures that you're creating, but you're
yeah,
essentially doing the same thinking that you would when you're writing some Apex, and you're doing the same thinking when you're essentially writing a flow. So I
right.
think you still have to be really careful about what you're looking to do. You still have to have a lot of clarity about steps you're looking to perform, what is the order of those steps that it should be, how can you optimize them if you can, and when do you and I mean, if you kind of just go a little bit deeper into that analogy and actually treat it like code, then you just know
Uh-huh.
that you have an Apex class and you don't want one method which has 500 lines in it, because
Yeah.
that just becomes too much to deal with. And
Mhm.
exactly in the same fashion, if you have a flow that has 100 boxes in it, then obviously, or 100 nodes in it, it's going to be impossible to be able to debug and maintain. So I think so that is the first, the easiest thing to get wrong from my point of view is that the flows that are too big, or flows that have too many nodes.
Yeah.
um because I feel like that just becomes counterproductive to what flows are supposed to do, because it's supposed
Hmm.
to be something really easy and enable you to create custom logic that you want. But if you
Yeah.
kind of creates, so you need to think about subflows. You need to think about kind of breaking your flows down into multiple different flows rather than just having one flow. And then when you start thinking about that, then you have to think about how do you organize your flows and everything else that as you think about when you're writing Apex classes, right? Because once you move from one method to multiple method, then multiple method to multiple classes, then you have to
Yeah.
also have to think about code organization. I mean, similarly, you kind of have to think about the flows as well.
Yeah, that's right. I agree with you. I mean, that's one of the the things which I always felt, right? A person coming to the Salesforce space, especially I'm talking from a functional consultant, because technical consultants usually we're programmers, right? So they understand separation of concept, right, and design patterns. In Flow, unfortunately, there is no design pattern concept. I
Yeah.
mean, people, I've seen Flow, which is like extensively complicated. There is no separate subflows. And when you try to debug that flows, right, when you try to add a functionality to that flow, it end up, you really get confused, right, where to add, how to add, and with the risk of breaking existing change. And another problem I felt, which you might agree as well, that writing a test class from a flow can be challenging at times, right?
Yeah. I mean, ideally, you can only write a test class currently for a few kind of flows, right? I think so. You can only write one for
Yeah,
a launch flow. You can't really write one for a screen flow.
yeah,
Plus, I mean, there is this whole capability now where you can use flow as triggers, because you can do like after and before DML triggered flows.
yeah,
That's just something. I mean, it's good if you want to do, if you have like a small little use case and that's how you want to use them, then
yeah,
absolutely go for it. But if you are in an org that is constantly changing, that has a huge piece of our program of work that has been, that is expected, then you need to, put
yeah.
in that early time, come up with some kind of standards, some kind of design patterns that you can apply to how you're writing flows as well.
Mhm.
That's it. I mean, it's
Yeah,
just about being smart about how you can write it so that uh, as much components of the flows, or you have subflows that are reusable, exactly the
hmm,
things that you essentially would think about when you're writing code, right? You want to make sure it is reusable, you want to make sure there is no duplication, you want to make
yeah,
sure that it's really easy to debug, you understand what is the input and output parameters of it,
yeah,
you want to know and clearly define that. Another
hmm,
thing I think so, it's what I feel is it's really easy to get wrong is to not have the differentiation of what is the difference between one and another version of a flow.
yeah,
uh,
yeah, that's right.
because typically what happens is that you are in a rush and you just change it and you don't really define what the version actually contains, because you're not adding anything to the description.
Yeah,
And that kind of can really yeah, like if you think about rollbacks and changes and all stuff, that kind of stuff, so you have like
hmm,
commit histories for source code, right? But for flows, they are not as good. I mean, you can commit them, but you can essentially do the same thing using versions in your org, so why not?
yeah, that's right. That's one of the reason why there are certain tools like static code analysis tools,
Hmm.
which can actually touch the flows, are
Yep.
very essential. Like for instance, I mean, Clayton is one of the tools, where I've seen that they touches the flows, so which is pretty cool. That being said, so right, I mean, flows are great, but at times, you might encounter a scenario where you might have to write invocable methods in Apex.
Hmm.
So like what I've found in that case, right? Say for instance, if the number of nodes in flows, right? It's like if you're writing only 4 nodes, and then you end up in writing most of the stuff in Apex. So then I believe there's no point in going to the flow route, right? You can pretty much do everything in Apex instead of creating just 2 3 nodes, and rest everything is in invocable methods.
Well, I kind of it can be useful, but it depends if you're using it as a pattern, right? So let's say, for example,
Yeah,
if you're writing a piece of Apex that kind of is an invocable Apex and it does one common thing, for example,
yeah,
and that common thing is something that you can apply across multiple objects. For example, let's say you have an invocable Apex that creates a PDF, right? So that's just an
yeah,
example
yeah,
that I've come up with right now. And so what you're going to do is that if you want to have multiple like PDFs generated of different kind of objects, then what you could
yeah,
do is that you could have a flow that is present for different objects, and it has
mhm,
a few nodes, and then all of them kind of call the same invocable with different parameters. And that
yeah,
is something that would be acceptable to me. I don't really think that's a problem. But till you are looking to reuse the invocable and reuse that pattern of how you're using the flow,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
in
That's right.
that case,
That's
I
right.
think that it's quite useful. But till you are, if you're not really thinking through things and you're not intentional about your design choices, then it
Yeah.
can really become a mess real soon, really quickly. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. And one of the thing, when I first started with the Salesforce, right, I looked at the flow. I said, okay, flows can do the things, but normally, right, when you are someone who has a lot of programming experience, your first inclination is to, okay, I can do that way efficiently in a code than a
Yeah.
flow, right? I think you might have had the similar thought
Yeah,
it at
absolutely.
times.
Yep. So I
Yeah.
come from a programming background as well. So I used to do, Java, JavaScript, and APIs and all that kind of stuff before I started doing Salesforce. So I mean, that
Yeah.
was my first thinking as well. It has taken me quite a while to kind of slowly move away from that and actually kind of see how flows have the advantages they do.
Mhm.
Specifically around if you want to create some UIs, right? I think so they can
Yeah.
enable you to do that really quickly. And if you're trying to do something where, let's say, you want to prototype something and see how the whole functionality looks before you go into the details of how exact, or how pixel perfect you want your UI to be, I think so flows are
Yeah.
something, like an amazing tool to do something like that. And then you can have
Yeah.
something up and running. You can assess what the usage of that particular uh, functionality is like, and then you can go back and see, okay, now these are the parts that I need to improve. This is where
Yeah.
I'm actually facing performance issues, it is slow, or whatever other kinds of issues, right? So it enables you to get to a place where this is a function that your users want, and then you just want to focus on how do you make it better rather than trying to over optimize from the get-go. I think so that's something we should all avoid.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. I agree with that because I've seen a couple of orgs where they have some of the orgs are pro code and some of the orgs what I've seen are completely anti code, right?
Mhm,
Where they say everything has to be done using declarative,
mhm.
and some places oh no, we can't trust on flows because flows are clunky, still not up to the standard what they expect. So I think what I believe should be case by case, right? I mean,
Yep.
it has to be based on the problem you're trying to solve. That being said, so right, I mean, I remember I had a conversation with one of the functional consultant a long time back. I mean, we did a podcast together, and he agreed that it doesn't matter you're a functional technical consultant. Once you get into flow, right, you have to have a basic understanding of programming. Just to know how the loop works, the for
Exactly.
loops works, or if else condition works, right?
Mhm.
Without that, you just end up in writing garbage flows, which end up causing a lot of problems in the future.
Exactly. And just to be able to know, like we spoke about how it is exactly like writing code, and you want to know how are you structuring your flows. Are you thinking about subflows? Are you thinking about what are your input and output parameters? Do you have a clear intention of a particular flow in your mind? Like, do you know what exactly is this particular flow supposed to do? Or and are you actually separating the flows by functionality, or what you're doing is that you are actually just adding functions onto a single flow that you created, which is something very
Yeah,
similar to people writing triggers for the first time, and they just keep adding more and more and more and more logic into that same trigger till it reaches a
yeah,
stage where you just don't really know what the trigger is doing anymore. um
yeah. That's right. I've seen that one a
yeah.
lot.
Yes.
That's one of the challenges with the code as well, right? I mean, coming to the apex, all right? I mean, people normally assume, right? I mean, someone say, who wants to be a programmer gets into Apex, which I personally believe, Apex should not be used as a first programming language to learn. The reason why I'm saying, I mean, you can disagree, that
Mhm.
I haven't seen a very good structurally, you know, object-oriented designed Apex code yet, because most of the times I've seen Apex is treated like a procedure language. You write it, yeah, they use classes, but I haven't seen getting virtual methods getting used, abstract classes getting used much, interfaces getting used. I've used interfaces, and these kind of things actually I believe freaks people off, and they look at it, oh, it's too complicated, let's get into the flow route.
Yeah.
So I have seen that behavior a bit. When even a programmer, who's wanted to start first time in the Salesforce, they think, oh, flows are easy, right? Because after all, it's a drag and drop.
Yeah.
So that mindset, I believe, is what causing a lot of tech debt in an org, right?
Yeah, no, no, absolutely agree. And just a point around, Apex is, so. I mean, it is kind of it's very balanced. I feel like Salesforce has done a really good job with Apex. I mean, there are don't I mean don't. Definitely, there are times when I'm pulling my hair out and thinking that, oh, I can do that in Java or JavaScript. Why can't I do that in Apex? But when then I try to kind of understand the scale at which it is working and the kind of limitations it is working in, I feel like they've done a wonderful job with Apex, because you can make it as object oriented as you want to make it. So, it's
Yeah.
definitely possible to use it like that. But do you always need to is another concern, right? So it's good to
Yeah.
understand and know object oriented programming, but also know when do you actually need to get into it. So until unless
Yeah.
you have actually really complicated use cases or a lot of customizations that you have to build, you can actually use it just as a procedural language, and there is nothing bad on that, because I think
Mhm.
so that's the biggest learning I've had working on the platform, is that you need to use the right tool for the job rather than just
Yeah,
making
yeah,
sure
that's
that you
right.
apply the same tool to, you can't use a cookie cutter approach basically.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. No, the what I was saying from the perspective, right? Not from a simple perspective, right?
Mhm.
Say a project, which has been built, right? And let's say any API integration, just for the sake of argument, let's say we are integrating with, say, one interface
Mhm.
and one third party, and
Mhm.
we have a lot of methods that is commonly used, right? Uh, so if the reason why I wanted to mention that, instead of when someone else wants to, interface with another, say, uh, vendor, right? And most of the HTTP calls to get post, and it's pretty much the same. For instance, let's say for the sake of argument, right? So I have seen a code where people duplicating it. So
Yep.
that's one of the approach I was saying, which I find it a bit frustrating at times, because the more you duplicate the code, the more it's difficult for you to fix, right? Because then you have to remember fixing in 5 different places instead of
Exactly.
fixing at one place.
Yep.
So that's one of the approach I was talking from an object-oriented perspective, because I came from a .NET background, and plus, one of the things, I've seen most of the C# code. I don't say every code, but most of the codes are very well structured
Mhm.
in an object-oriented pattern. And Apex is pretty simple. I mean, to be honest, from a
Yep.
library perspective, it's not bulky. It does not have too much of, like, for instance, if you take collections, it only have set, list, and maps, right? You don't have, like, maps, even Java you have, but you don't have the complex, like the hash map and other kind of stuff, right? Like we have in other languages. So
Yep.
in that perspective, yes, I do agree. Salesforce done a pretty good job, and Apex is pretty stable. But the only concern I raised was, right, when you have a complex requirement and the developers started using it as a procedure language, and someone else comes on board, and then they say, oh yeah, the guy has done the similar, let me copy paste the code. That's where the tech debt started to build, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. But and if you really think about it, duplication is just one of the issues that you would essentially see
Yeah,
in,
yeah, yeah,
just
that's
one
right.
of the
Yeah,
smells that actually you would actually see encapsulation being violated everywhere. You would actually see no strict boundaries in Apex code as well. Um,
yeah,
and I think so. A little bit of it is kind of from where you kind of see a lot of Apex developers or technical consultants coming through from a functional background as well. And I mean, I know quite a lot of folks in the industry who kind of have started just writing code or becoming technical on their own, which I feel is like a big feat, because I don't think so I would ever be able to do that. Just to
yeah,
pass
yeah.
that bridge from functional to technical is really hard, and to do that on
Hmm.
your own is even harder. So I think so Salesforce is now providing the right resources, I think so, with Trailhead, and there are a lot of documentation around enterprise Apex patterns and things like that, which kind
Yeah,
of makes it possible for someone who is doing self-learning and kind of is on that journey to learn those things as well. But it's like, if I really be honest, if I'm being honest about myself as well, when I started writing Java, I didn't really know any of the design patterns, right? It took me some
yeah,
time to kind of understand. Plus, I had seniors around me who kind of guided me and were there at the right point in time to ask the right questions, which made me think and understand that, yeah, okay, maybe this is not the right way, or this is the pattern that actually I can apply here. So it is the same thing kind of process needs to happen in Apex as well. It's just that I think so we have a lot of developers who have not spent huge amounts of time, and they don't always have a lot of leadership around them in terms of being able to guide them. And I think
yeah,
so that is slowly changing as well, because people are realizing that this needs to be a bigger, more holistic program of work rather than just a couple of consultants trying to get something done.
Yeah, that's right. I agree. I mean, like, it's interesting you mentioned that, right? When you start as a Java developer, I started as a C developer,
Mhm.
and C is not an object-oriented programming language, right? It's
Yep.
mostly used for, I used to code. My first task was to code for, microprocessor,
Yep.
and it was complex language, right? And there's no, I didn't use any design pattern. I wrote it exactly like a procedure language. 50 lines of code. It does the job. Forgotten about it. The actual transition really happened, when I started to move to C++, right? And I
Mhm.
used to write very bad crap code, I would say,
Mhm.
for a few years till someone pointed to me that that code, it smells so bad that, it's a way of saying, right? And that, it will make the entire system crumble the way
Yep.
you write code. So that made me realize, right? It's just the garbage I've been producing. So that, that realization, right? A developer has to come with a self-realization, right? And you're right. People need to have mentors around them who can guide them, right? If someone like it, that's what the code review is very important, in my opinion.
Yep.
Someone very senior doing the code review and say, hey, this approach is not really great. Can you try it this way to see, right? So yeah,
True.
so and that's one of the reason why I think that, I coined the term, right, called flow smell. But that's I've been noticing a lot in flow smell as well, like a concept of flow smell where flows get extremely complicated, and then developer just gave up looking at the flows.
Yeah. That's
Yeah,
actually a good term. I think so. We probably need to create a list because it would be great if you could just, create a list somewhere of these are all the flow smells that you have noticed. And then, a lot of people would be really happy if they can look back and refer to it. Like from my point of view, I think so. If there is anything that has more than 30 nodes, um,
yeah,
let's say that's a stretch. So, and 30 is like the max. Um,
yeah,
you probably want to be between 15 to 20 nodes, and that's it.
yeah,
If you're trying to do anything more complex than that, you really need to step back and question yourself: are you doing it the right way? And I mean, there are multiple ways to solve that same problem, right? Maybe you need to go to Apex. Maybe you need to actually have a different processing object where you can externalize your logic into, and yeah, so multiple ways you could possibly solve it. But yes, what is important is that you kind of step back and see that what you're trying to do and what is the impact it's going to have on the org.
yeah. That's right. I agree with you. I totally agree with you. That's I I've been lazy in writing blogs, to be honest. I'm not really a guy to write a blog. I can make a video about explaining the stuff. That's more easier for me.
Mhm.
But yeah, based on experience, like you both work on us, some of the similar stuff, and if you notice, right, how messy the flow has been, and then it's frustrated,
Yeah, true.
you and I both. So yeah, the same thing happened to me on Apex as well, right? Some of the codes I looked at it and I like, man, who can write this kind of code, right? No error logging, no try catch at times,
Yep.
right? And everything is getting logged somewhere else, and sometimes there's no logging whatsoever. So I think having a standardized process, right, could be a good way to start. I mean, don't have to be extremely rigid with the process, right? But flexible process where everyone can follow, and then come to a bit of understanding, right? This is the way to move forward.
Yep. True. That's right. I agree. Yeah, I think so. Especially with more and more of this is gonna become natural, and people are gonna get better at it. I think so.
Yeah.
There is a lot more developer friendly tools that Salesforce has kind of come up with. For example,
Yeah.
Salesforce DX, and now with second generation packaging as well. I feel like when
Yeah.
you can focus on a smaller set of code or smaller set of functionality, then you
Hmm.
can have a lot more focus on the quality of it, and then you
Yeah.
just have to think about how it all kind of fits together, so you're kind of working on that a single block rather than always thinking about all the blocks together, and then
Yeah.
that kind of makes it really easy for you to kind of hold it in your head. There is a term for it as well in that book, team topologies, which I'm forgetting right now. um,
Right.
yeah, but essentially is what decides how good a team is, basically, or how good your code quality is, or whatever your delivery
Yeah.
doing you are doing is.
Yeah.
So yeah.
That's right. That's right. I agree with you on that. Yeah. And another thing, I believe that, whenever you write an Apex, right, the test classes should be good, right? People should
Totally.
write positive and negative tests, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes, I had a habit, right? Initially that I used to write only positive tests and say, oh, it hit the code coverage, right? Why
Yeah.
should I bother? But I was so wrong. So I have to write positive tests and negative tests to make sure, right, it fails, and what happens, it, succeeds. So, that's that kind of mindset. It's like you know, I believe, people should start having a test-driven development approach. Start from a test point of view first to see what all things you. I mean, that's just my personal opinion, though. That you should write from a test perspective, say what happens if I do this, what happens if I do that, and then based on that, you start building your code.
Yeah. And it depends on what kind of, what should I say, what kind of reliability you are expecting out of your build
Yeah.
process and your tests, right? So I am somebody who's really very, very risk averse. So I
Yeah.
essentially want to make sure that there are unit tests available for any kind of change that I've done. So if there is
Yeah.
anything that I can unit test, I will make sure that I, write a unit test for it, or I will ask my team to make sure that there is a unit test that is written for it. I mean, I would
Hmm.
even go so far as making sure that you even have unit tests for the process builders that you would write, and even for validation rules, because you want to make sure that 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 is all part of code, right? Because it is all
Yeah.
changes that you have made onto your org. And
Yeah.
during your build process, you actually want to understand if your org has shifted away from what was the expected state. And that is
Right.
all the
Right.
tests are allowing us to do, right? Because if it is moved away, even so, let's say, even if you think about a validation rule that just has a message that has changed from what it was before to what it is now, but if it
Yeah.
is on a customer facing community page, you want to know about it, because you want to make sure that you have it in your release notes and actually
Hmm.
have told customer that, okay, yes, that this was the error message that you were going to receive before, but now that language has changed to this, so that the customer is aware that, yep, this is an intentional change and this is why it has changed, rather than just making it happen.
Yeah, that's right. I agree with you on that. Totally agree. And I appreciate that you mentioned that, because I mean, it's good to be, pessimistic when it comes to the code, I believe, because, the advantage of being that, I mean, some people say, oh, you're too pessimistic, but if you look from a long run, right? It helps business saves a lot of money, right? Because if something goes into production,
Mhm.
fixing a stuff in a production gets more messy than fixing in a sandbox, right?
Exactly. Yes. Yes. And that's
And
what it
it
is, right?
costs, yeah,
Sorry, go ahead.
yeah, sorry. No, no, go ahead, please.
No, I was just going to say exactly that, I mean, the more you can test to the left, the easier and the cheaper it is to test. And if you have Apex tests that are actually enabling you to verify all the logic that you have actually built into the org, then
Yeah.
there's nothing like it, because these are tests that you can run really quickly if you write them right. Again, if you write them
Mhm.
right, you can run them really quickly. Otherwise, they can take heaps of time to run. Um, so you need to make sure
Yeah.
that you're smart with your unit tests, but it is also gives you heaps of peace of mind to kind of just be able to say that if these tests pass, I am sure that production functionality is not going to be impacted, or it is going to be impacted in the fashion as it was intended. And I think so that peace of mind is,
Yeah.
yeah, it's yeah, I don't think so anyone can put a price on it, especially for me, no one can put a price on it.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with you. I mean, it's just gonna, because my biggest concern is, right, you release a code or flow, right? And you realize it's an issue on the production and it started impacting the data. And now
Mhm.
that's something is very, very can get very messy unless the a company has a backup solution, right? But
Yep.
unfortunately, you and I know, right? Most companies do not have backup solution. They think Salesforce is safe, but most of them don't realize, if the data can get corrupted in production because of a messy Apex code or flow doing something which not supposed to do.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah. So yeah, I agree that the test classes makes a lot of difference. So yeah, that's interesting. I mean, that's pretty much I wanted to talk about, because I thought we can do a quick, a catch up and like a podcast talking about flows and Apex. So it's been interesting. So thank you very much for your time, Gaurav.
It's all good, Vikas. It's always a pleasure talking with you. And yeah, you have a lot of knowledge. So, discussing these things, I kind of gives me your perspective and helps me understand things better. So, yeah, thank you for the opportunity.
Cool. Thank you very much, man. Thank you. Have a great day. Thank
Yep.
you.
Bye.